Welcome to this Headspring webinar on diagnostics and identifying performance gaps in your program design. My name is Paul Lewis. I'm the editorial director of Headspring, and I'm joined here today with Malek Adjerad. Malek Adjerad is the global head of learning and innovation for Headspring, and you led the team that developed our diagnostic approach and the 7 steps, which is what we're going to talk about today. Let me start, Malek. Why is it so important to get the diagnostics right when we're designing a learning program?
Yes, thank you, Paul. So I will answer to this question. But first, you presented me as Global Head of Learning and Innovation. And I just want to clarify what it is, because it's a big name and big title. And my children always ask me, what do you do? Okay. And so I say, just to explain, I'm an architect. Very simply, I'm an architect. And I will share some little story. So when I was a kid, I wanted to become an engineer and building bridges, right? But I was not good in math and then science, so I couldn't build bridges. So why I'm saying the whole story is because now I see my job as really building invisible bridges, because it's what it's all about. Leadership development is building bridges between people. So it's really how I see my job. And now to get back to the genesis of the 7 step, start with the client. The clients, so we listen to the clients, and there are 3, if you like, recurrent comments were coming from the clients. The first one, typical and it's quite tactical, head of L&D, I've got a group of people, they have an issue, performance-related issue, name it. And they jump straight away to solution, and generally speaking, the solution takes the form of a program. And they know that it's not the right solution, but there is nothing else available. So, and the solution they created creates the problems, you know, okay. If you know what I mean.
New
so
problems.
They wanted, exactly. Yeah. So they wanted something different. Mm-hmm. They wanted something like an impartial analysis of the situation and come up with some recommendation. That's really the first thing. Secondly, something maybe slightly more strategic, I will say. I know, head of L&D, we've done a lot of work. I was head of L&D myself. We did a lot of work to really align the business objectives and learning. And in some organization, learning, it was seen as, you know, the black box or whatever you call it. But there is still a need to fully align the business strategy of an organization and development. I need to see how development can contribute to the success of my organization.
Okay, and this is a crucial step because it's about strategy, and we'll talk about that in a second. What else is there in terms of importance?
And the third point we heard from our client is really moving from, if you like, events after events when it comes to learning to something much more fluid. And really create, and I'm going to use an old-fashioned way of describing learning, creating, you know, a learning organization. But the idea is still valid right now. It's really giving the ability for people to constantly learn from their experiences, from everything they do. When they come to the office or at home now, they work, but they learn at the same time. How we can do that.
And that's a very different mindset. And we'll talk about that because you've gone into great detail about how one does that and how that creates the culture, a different culture. So it's interesting you talk about an architect because it's a combination, isn't it, between the logic and the structures, but also the creativity. And it's that duality that's very important. So there's another duality I think that relates to, and that is this idea of collaboration and customization. So all our programs are run through with this idea of customization and collaboration. And it seems to me that that's the heart of getting a diagnosis right and also a design right. And your point here is that you have to think about the strategy of the company before you can really address the learning concerns. In a way, those are those 2 points. What's the goal? Why are we doing this at all? But it can't be easy because you've got learning and development people in one silo they may not get a voice at the top table, or maybe they do,
Yeah.
but it's vital to getting the strategy right. It's vital for strategy, but it's also vital to get the learning right. How do you bring those two sides together?
Yeah. That's the whole point of the 7th step. Really, what you have to see with the 7th step is a flexible framework where we can align the business strategies and the learning objectives. It's really, in a nutshell, if we have to summarize what it is what we try to achieve here. And when it comes to learning, you mentioned it yourself, it's an art for us. Obviously, there are some techniques, some science behind it. Learning is that you need to be aware, and it's reflected in the 7th step. And we took a lot on board the latest breakthrough in neuroscience, for example, to really get to the learner's mindset. But we are in development, dealing with a human being, and they could have rational, irrational behaviors. So that's why I'm saying it's also an art. So see it as a flexible framework when we try to combine these different approaches to put the right solution for clients.
There are so many different elements that people haven't really thought about, and you've got to kind of get them right, otherwise you don't get the impact. So one element about Headspring is that we make great use of the Financial Times journalists when we're trying to understand the context in which a company is operating. And that's going to influence the strategic thinking. But it's not just about understanding what's going on in the world and what trends are coming. And I think we have a great advantage in that sense. But also understanding, well, what do we need to do? How do we need to react? What competencies and qualities do we need in our people to be able to meet those changing challenges that we've identified? So you've got the strategic thinking, but you've also got the learning journey that works into that. And I'm wondering, do companies really understand that the learning really isn't relevant unless it fits in with the strategy, if it aligns with the strategy? I mean, is that an argument that we've won, or we're still fighting?
No, I think the battle is won.
Okay.
Is won, and how you do it, that's the key question. And there is lots of question, for example, of how you collect data to make the case that your learning has contributed to the final result of the organization. So the question is more on the how you do it more than why we have to do it, if you like.
Okay.
And I just want to add, because you make the analogy with the FT journalist, and it's in our DNA, and it's reflected somehow in how we design our learning program as well. You're a journalist yourself, so apparently when journalists have to write a piece, an article, he always use the triangle methodology, meaning he has to have 3 sources of data in order to write an article and get to what they call the truth. We have borrowed this idea into our design of learning solutions. So we always have this triangulation, the different voices, to really understand, okay, what is a core issue we try to resolve, but from different perspectives. And generally, the 3 different perspectives are senior leadership, prospective participants, and head of L&D. Because they all have a way to see, to talk about the problems, their own filters and bias as well.
And the idea is to get them all in the room talking, or get their views at least.
Exactly. And there are different ways we can do it, depending on the culture, what the companies allow us to do it. But we've got different techniques to do it. So we can get everyone in the room, or we can use, and we are a big fan of ethnographic studies, observe on the ground, if the company allows, if it's possible.
So what would that involve, observing on the ground? Just going around talking to people, interviewing people, or...
For example,
yes.
As
simple as that.
For example.
But I guess people would be a little bit cagey, won't they, about giving their real opinions if they're maybe not the senior leadership, but they perform a vital role and they have a very strong opinion, expressing that opinion. How does one maneuver around that caution? Because, companies can be very political.
Absolutely. My answer will be twofold. First, we need to really analyze the situation, the culture of the organization, what is possible, not possible to do. So it requires a bit of analysis and question. Secondly, another techniques, another skill we borrow from journalists is the ability to ask insightful, questions. And we've got, without being too jargony here, a design jam session where we have a section called Hard Talk. Hard Talk.
Okay.
It's really using journalistic skills to get to the bottom of an issue. You know, things you go under the carpet, it's never talk, and journalists know how to do it, keeping, I would say, a safe harmony in a peaceful way.
Yeah, that's critical. People don't feel that they're taking a big risk.
Exactly.
I know one of the things you've done, because we talked about it before, is this idea of projecting into the future and looking back and saying, imagine you're in the future, but looking back at the crazy way we did things today. And it's quite a clever technique because you withdraw the day-to-day tension from the situation. You're imagining things. And if we look back 20 years or 40 years at a situation, of course, there are so many things that would look absolutely crazy today. I mean, in issues of diversity and inclusion and so on. Is that an effective way now if we project forward? Because it's hard to imagine, even though it's essential to imagine, what lies 5 years, 10 years ahead.
Yeah. So you're moving. So basically, it's one of the techniques we use in step one, which is all about the strategic objectives. And the methodology you borrow from coaching, if you like, is called Foresight, Create, Insight. And what is very interesting, Paul, to know, he also works at individual level as well. So it's really projecting in the future, removing the emotional, charge, and really focusing on what is important and not important. And we develop this methodology at the company level, and they really reflect on what is the core issue here. What doesn't make any sense? Once again, we customize our learning and how we design solution, how we diagnose. So it will be adapted for some companies. For other companies, we may use more traditional ways of finding about the strategic objectives of organization, competitive advantage, and so on. So it's really a mix between, I will say, qualitative data, quantitative data. But for sure, Foresight, Create, Insight is one of our, I will say, flagship solution when it comes to analyze the strategic objective of an organization and seeing from a people development perspective, future focus.
And it's important in a different way, a related way, which is the world is changing so fast. I mean, COVID has demonstrated how things can change. And in a way, you have to be looking at 2, 5 years, 10 years ahead. It's not some distant vision anymore. You need, in a sense, get into that mindset that says, well, look, let's not try to understand just today. Let's look at where we think it could be in 5 years, in 10 years. So it's a good practice to do anyway.
Exactly. So we have to be very clear here. It's not and once again, it's not the old way of doing, you say the 5 years plan, very popular in the 90s and so on. You use the word, it's a mindset, it's a practice. And it's a third technique we borrow from journalists. It's really not the ability to understand the current trends, the common trends, is to anticipate the future trends that will impact your industry. And how today I should adapt, what type of behaviors I should acquire in order to respond to the future trends that will impact. And it's a practice, it's a mindset. Totally agree with the words.
No, I mean, it's a very powerful tool. So the step one, in a sense, is strategy. Understand where you're going. What's that North Star? Why are we learning? Why did we want to do this? But a step two is sort of signposting it, is to allow people to imagine, what would I be doing as part of this learning process? Imagine myself sitting in a meeting talking about geopolitical risks, creating a coherent sustainability idea. What are the ways we signpost so people can be familiar and accommodate this forward-looking approach?
If I may politely and kindly correct you, first step, we're really focusing on the strategic objective, and we're talking business, and we're using business language, very little about learning, because step two is all about learning. And the question is how learning can help you to solve your current pain points, current problems, or drive your organization forward. And focusing on learning, and really distinguish between what is due to the environment, where learning can doesn't have any impact, if you like, and what is learning. When we identify this element, we can really focus, okay, what does success look like? What does success look like? And we want to focus on the impact of our solution. We want to help the organization to progress, to achieve their objectives. And we've got, once again, different techniques. I'm not going to, I would say, bombard you with too much detail at this stage, but we use gamifications.
Okay.
And it's done with design cards. We really like this idea to play with different cards, like poker cards and so on. And we give the flexibility to the client to use the cards to really analyze how learning, to respond, to the question how learning can help the organization to achieve the objectives. So we give this flexibility to the clients as well, depending on the culture they have.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I know another tool that we use, and I think you've been involved with this as well, is this idea of being very direct about it. We're going to have business projects at the end of the program, and you are going to identify a real problem that the company has, and you're going to solve them. That's part of the learning. It's an easy thing to imagine, almost the end of that process. We're going to solve a company problem.
Company challenges is one of, well, the catchphrase we have is what we really want is, and please take it rightly, we don't want, to be learning something, or jolly things you do on Friday afternoon when you've done everything else. We really want the learning to become a really strategic function and help the organization to progress. So we try to be as close as possible to the challenges that they face. So how learning can help you to solve the challenges. So it's a long way to tell you, yes, we use different techniques to extract learning and helping the individual to solve the current challenges.
That's the trick. Always make it relevant. Bring the theoretical and the practical together so people have a real sense that this is working. It's not something you go away and forget about. Actually, you've got a problem. Now, the next step, which is one I find most interesting, is the idea of the who, the personas in the room. Who's actually going to be in the room? Because it's not just the variety of people or who you've selected, but also what are their attitudes to learning? What are they thinking? How do you tap into their motivations? I guess at one level it's, well, look at the gender balance and the age balance and seniority, but I guess it goes much deeper. Your understanding has to be, tell us more about creating the personas.
Well, you say already a lot, and I will say, what is the impact? What do we want? What we really want at Headspring? What we want to create engaging, productive learners that really don't go to consume any learning for the sake of consuming, really creating meaning for themselves. And the best way to do so, we create different persona to know about the individuals, the people who are going to receive the learning. So step one, step two, we were focusing at the organization level, and we moving to the individuals. And it gives us so much. It's like a picture, if you like, that after we can work with the educators, and the first questions they ask me, who are these people? Who are the learners? What can you tell me about the learners? And we give these different pictures, the different personas, to the educators. And they can adapt the way of teaching to the participants.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been on a lot of programs and I've witnessed a lot of programs. And the thing that strikes me is that we make an assumption that everyone in the room has the same goal or is thinking the same thing, but really down to small things like, look, I just want to get the facts. Give me the key points and I've got to go. I've got other things, more important things to do. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are people who say, well, the learning is important, but actually this is a rare opportunity for me to be with colleagues who I've never met before, get in a different setting, just create those sort of bonds that are important in a working relationship. So things that actually seem to be marginal are actually pretty important to understand.
And it's Well, it's an art, once again, to find the right balance between all the needs. But the first step is really to understand why they are here, beyond what they have to learn. Okay,
beyond what they
so
have
you
to learn.
exactly.
Yeah.
So some people, the social aspect, the social learning is key. The networking is very key, and it has to be, I will say, translated somehow in the design of the solution. But the bottom line is, let's talk, let's find out, let's what they really want, what they really need from a program, from a development opportunity. Sorry.
It's about being honest. And I would say to those people who are listening today, try to be quite honest about what you really want out of a program when you're sitting there and you're thinking, what am I really gaining? And to be very honest about it. I think there's a tendency for people to say, well, I should say this. I should say what is expected of me. But there's plenty of room to be honest. And I think people on programs should say, well, actually, yeah, I want the facts, or I want to bond with my colleagues. Perhaps it's even worth writing down a truthful account of this is what I want to get out of it. And then we've got something to talk about, because then you can design a program that fits those particular needs.
If I can follow up, Paul, to the people who listen to us, I guess I can make a bet here that we all want to have engaging learners who are happy to learn and do something about the learning, and is what is at stake here.
And there's another point that you identify, and I think often is missed, but is absolutely crucial. And this is, you're not coming in on a fresh sort of canvas. Okay, the company, the client has already done a lot of thinking. Sometimes they've done no thinking, but sometimes done a huge amount of thinking. And to come in and pretend you have the answers. I mean, you talked about being humble. Yes, we do know a lot. We do have a lot of experience, but we don't know everything. And it's very important to get an understanding of what the company already knows, what it's done. And there's lots of interest in this. They've put a lot of resources into it. You don't want to tell them, no, that's no good. How do you align what they've done with what we're suggesting? How do you find that common ground so that we all move forward together?
Normally it's the opposite. So basically it's overload of information, because all companies now, we do engagement survey, feedback, summaries. So it's a lot of information. So yes, we take into account in our thinking, and we don't start from scratch. But what we bring is really a new pair of eyes, fresh perspective. And we ask maybe questions that internally is difficult to ask for different reasons. And getting back to my point about journalistic skills, is really the ability to ask the insightful questions. And straight away we can add some value and see, I don't know, for example, engagement survey, a different use, a different perspective.
But the spirit of it is one of collaboration.
Absolutely.
It's not about, it's, look, we may be wrong, we may be right, but here's a perspective, consider it, think about it. And if it's done well, and if it's done sort of diplomatically and carefully, you will get a better solution. We have to, I mean, I've been on a program where the program was started and things were not quite right. And actually midway through the program, we realized, no, we've observed what's going on, and there's something we didn't spot for. And we were flexible enough just to change it midway, and it had the desired result. So, yeah.
And Paul, because you're making a very important point here, you totally describe him, journalistic skills in action. So basically, for me, it's a second nature. Maybe I'm not hammer enough that at Headspring, what we do is co-creation, customized programs. So we're working with the clients to really build a solution. And so it's really a co-creation process. I totally agree on that particular point.
This is what I guess what we're saying with design, diagnostics leading design. You can't get good diagnostics without the collaboration. Absolutely. You can't work out what's going on. You have to have that. And then you can't get good design without the customization. You need that custom. So those two themes have to run through. And this 7-step process is constantly reinforcing this idea. So here's another step of yours, which I find particularly interesting. And this is this idea of the learning culture within the organization. So they may have all sorts of data, they may have approaches and so on, but actually there's a deeper issue here, which is that learning culture. You talked about personas before. There's a sort of company persona, isn't there? I think you mentioned something which I thought encapsulated it very well, which is the learning culture is a sort of window onto the soul of the company. It's like, what is this? What's the feel of this company? What's possible? Tell me about the kind of learning cultures you find in companies.
I'm going to stereotype it here, sorry, apology, but I will give you the two extreme and really to illustrate what we're talking about here. And I'm seeing less one of the extreme, by the way, because evolved, but extreme one is really, okay, I've got this group of people, group of leaders, whoever, they have an issue and they send it to some kind of learning magic to be fixed. Sorry for the energy, but it's really to fix. I'm seeing less and less, to be fair. That's one extreme. The other extreme is really, I cannot find better term, it's learning organizations. It's really organization. And I met more and more organizations now moving toward this idea of what you do is an opportunity to learn, to improve, to enhance your current practices. And the idea, what is at stake, is really free up some time to become more efficient and innovate, do new things, new ways of creating, basically being creative. And these organizations are, for us, are germs, but you got in the middle lots of different situations. And we have to take into account, and we use questionnaires here, but also we like to take the pulse, as I say, ethnographic studies, just observing if it's possible, if time allows, and we'll talk about boundaries, which is a key point here. And to get really a pulse of what is a culture in order to engage the participants. The final objective is really because we are all busy, we all stress somehow with different perspectives, we all have different dilemma. So it's really how we can engage the learners in the best way possible.
And that isn't just on the program. That's the culture of the company. I mean, I think, again, for those listening, it's quite a useful experience just to write down when and where do you learn things? When and where do you get an insight? And it could be anywhere. It could be in the canteen. It could be just chatting to somebody. It could be overhearing an aside or a conversation. It may not be in a formal program. One has to be aware of all those things if you really want to get the most value out of the learning, and that comes down to the corporate culture. So I think it's worth just listing, what have I learned and where did I learn it? And that gives you a sense of both your own approach, but also the company culture. And actually, on that issue of the company culture, what would you have to create? What kind of atmosphere that allows a person to say, I screwed up, but actually I have a process by which I'm going to say, this is the lesson I've learned, and this is what I'm going to share, and I don't feel that I've got to cover myself and defend myself because, in fact, this is a learning experience. But how do you create that sense of safety that people can feel comfortable doing that?
I will be very tactical and talk about what we are very keen at Headspring is really the idea of experiments. And it works very well with some organization. And experiments, when I hear, I don't know for you, but experiment means failure. I think about, who is the person who invited penicillin? Can you remember?
Yeah.
So basically he tried, or Edison, he tried many times. And so people get, I know, okay, I will fail, but at some stage, maybe I will succeed. So the idea of experimenting put everyone at ease. We can fail, it's perfectly fine. Yeah. I'm here to learn. And at the end, maybe I will find something never done before. Yeah. So we've got a full protocol, so it's guided and it's quite unique. The experimentation in the workplace and on leadership or development capabilities.
Yeah, so for example, you wouldn't have a problem getting the wrong inventor of penicillin, for example. You'd learn from your mistakes, you'd go and check it out and find out what it is, and
absolutely.
Then share it. So,
exactly.
So there's always a learning experience.
Absolutely.
As per demonstrated here.
Thank you.
Right. I'm interested in this area where we go a little bit deeper. It's about culture, but it's all about how we learn as well. So Headspring's done a lot of work on metacognition because so much of getting effective design and diagnosis right is understanding how we actually learn, what's going on in our brains. Because if we understand that, we can design things in a way that's much more effective. What are some of the sort of, you could call it the tips and tricks or whatever, that really enhance the learning?
Yeah. I just want to make a general comment first is, there are lots of breakthrough with neuroscience. We know how the brains works much better and so on, and how we learn. But what is interesting is there is nothing really new. I mean, if you get back to Socrates or antiquity, we know that. The meiotic systems, the art of asking questions, the reflection. But you know what is a key difference now, Paul? Is we can prove it with science. We have evidence that if you give self-reflection to the people at the end of the day or at the end of the week, where they can take the time to digest information, and it's a guided self-reflection, think about some question, what I have learned, how I apply it, what does it mean for me? Well, it works. It's learning in action, and we can prove it. Neuroscience proves that's one effective way to learn. Before, it was seen by some organization as dead time. I want to push as much content as possible, stuff my people with learning. We know it doesn't work. So now I feel much more comfortable to explain to my client with rational data, with the science, why self-reflection works, why you need to pass out some session, why shorter session is better than longer session, why you have a deep inactivity in the middle of the week and you have to re-energize somehow. We can prove it. We knew it before without, proving it. Now we can prove it. And he facilitates the conversation with his client.
Yeah, I mean, this is so important because I've seen often you've got a 3-day program and every single hour is filled up with something, because I think clients fear we're not getting enough sort of bang for our buck. We need to have sessions on everything. And it becomes counterproductive. And as you're saying, the neuroscience, the science of learning is demonstrating you've got to build in the reflection time. You've got to acknowledge that people are not robots.
Yeah.
You have to accept it. There's nothing wrong with it. And then just in terms of getting yourself started as well, I know it's very hard to just sit down and learn. This idea of being in the flow, I think Csikszentmihalyi, if I've pronounced the name right, the Hungarian psychologist, talk about getting into the flow.
The flow.
It's an ideal, and it's incredibly efficient. How do we encourage people to be totally absorbed in the subject matter? Are there ways in which you're constantly engaging people in the classroom or whatever the activity is?
Yeah, and what is a key, I will say, key finding from neuroscience, how brain works, is, do you know what is the number one factor for you to learn? Do you know, Paul? Is sleep. You have to sleep, and I can prove it. But it's interesting because I reflect back on the 90s, for example. I go to a boot camp and we try to work as much as possible, study in the evening, get very short night sleep. It doesn't work. It's counterproductive. But now I can feel very comfortable to explain why it's important. It sounds a bit trivial, but it's so important.
Well, people assume that there's something macho about saying, oh, I only had 3 hours sleep.
Yes.
You wouldn't say, oh, I had 7 pints of beer last night and I'm only half focused. No one will turn around and say, well done. Yeah. But we do sort of think, oh, I was on a flight and this and that, and actually I haven't slept, but I'm still working. It's crazy. I think that's probably be one of the things we'll look back on and say, what on earth were we thinking that going without sleep was regarded as a good thing, an impressive thing. So I think this... But in terms of getting that engagement right, I mean, I guess there's a variety in the classroom as well. It's not just the lecture. There's the simulations. There's the gamification, which you mentioned. Lots of different things that fire you up and keep you constantly engaged.
Exactly. And it's really the idea of the learning tools, and this step 6, if I don't mistaken, is really... Once again, what is at stake? We want to engage the participants. So we use a wide variety of techniques, simulation, gamification, but really what is the most relevant to the target audience that we identified with the personas, what will work. And virtual, we know that to some extent it works for some situation. I won't go to the detail, but it doesn't allow right now to do something, for example, for brainstorming. It's still rudimentary. It's still very difficult to do virtually some brainstorming or very deep conversation. So it's really find the right balance between face-to-face, virtual, the hybrid mode of learning, blended learning, but really mixing and finding the right combination for your organization, for your participants.
Get that balance right, and
Exactly.
then you enhance engagement all the way. In a way, people. I mean, the problem with flow, of course, is that when you've got into that state of flow, if you know about it, you think, "Oh, great, I'm in the state of flow," and then, of course, you're out of it again. So, perhaps it's better not to know about it, but just to experience it. Look, there's one last step I want to talk about and get your views on. That's the idea of boundaries. That's the realistic sense of what you can do and what you can't do. This is not an ideal situation. It's what we're dealing with. What's the reality? How does one recognize the boundaries of what we can and can't do?
Yeah. For the little story, I will tell you, Paul, I have to fight hard with my team because they wanted to put it at the beginning, the reality check. What is the budget? What is the timing? What we can afford? Really is the reality check. And they wanted, let's go through these lenses first, and then we can do the rest. My take is the following. I prefer to always develop the ideal situation, the ideal solution for the client, and then go through the reality check. It's debatable. Maybe some people disagree with me, but that's the tech we have. So it's really, as you say, boundaries. Classic one is time. How much time I can devote, my people can devote to formal, informal learning. And it has to be, I would say, factoring in building the solution.
You're saying because it's not... there's a certain budget resource, there's a certain time, that's just how it is. That's the culture of the company.
But if you've done all the work before analyzing what is key, what is important, what you can left, for later stage, this conversation become much more strategic, right? Because you will focus your resources, for example, financial resources, to what really matter right now that will help you, if you remember step 1, to achieve your objective. If you remember step three, I'm getting lost here, but what do people need to learn in terms of knowledge, skills, attitude, what is important? It gives a sense of prioritization. Because what I'm seeing a lot of time with my clients, some prospects, is a wish list or shopping list, as I call it. Don't take it badly. And it's really helping the clients to prioritize what is important now. What shall I do? What is my first step?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a core question that everyone has to address for themselves, which is, how important is this learning right now to my job? Have I got something better to do, more important to do? And I guess that's the core element of it. Can you answer that question? Can they answer that question for themselves? Actually, this is more important.
It's where we started the conversation, is how, and is a dilemma, how you align development and business objective. If you make this clear connection, this question is not relevant anymore, because you know that you need to develop in order to achieve your business objective, to be where you want to be in X years' time. So it's really what is at stake at the beginning of the process. And as I say, the question on limitation, another word for boundaries is limitation. This question becomes much more strategic and somehow easier, because you know what is important, not important. Where you should put your resources, financial, people.
Realistic and pragmatic.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
As well as strategic. Look, I guess we've scratched the surface. There's a massive amount to talk about on all of these steps, but I think it's just given a sense of the kind of range of issues and the depth as well of what companies, strategists, learners need to be thinking about. And we should all be thinking about these things when we go into a program, either as a participant or as an L&D professional. So I think that's given a sense of how we approach the idea of diagnostics, and it leads on to design. I hope everybody's found this very interesting. I've certainly found the discussion interesting, and if you fell asleep in the middle of it, that's good, because sleep is important as well, as Malek has outlined. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Please write, comment, and give us some of your experiences and commentary and feedback, and where you disagree with us or where you agree with us. It's all part of building a big picture to get this right. This is the collaboration. This is how we get it right.
Absolutely.
By saying, thank you very much, Malek.
Thank you,
Thank
Paul.
you, everybody, for listening.